today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Of course.
So, as you know, we're doing these virtual visits this year for the Slow Wine Guide instead of visiting everyone in person, in order to, minimize our travel. Although I wish I was out there right now. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Of course. My pleasure.
Excellent. So I would love to get started by having you tell us a bit the story of Bedell and the roles of the key people who work there.
Well, Bedell is one of the oldest companies on Long Island making wine. It was founded in 1980 by the Bedell family and had a great record of success during that time as one of the early pioneers in the region, and was sold in 2000 to the Lynn family, Michael Lynn and his wife Nina, and has continued the tradition of excellence and quality winemaking since that time. We produce around 15,000 to 16,000 cases of wine every year that we all grow ourselves and under sustainable production practices and certification. And yeah, here we are
Fantastic.
today.
And how long have you been with the company?
This is my 11th year with the company, and I've been working in the industry out here since 1982. So I've been out here for quite a long time.
So you've seen
Working,
it grow and change over the years, I'm sure.
oh yeah, quite a bit, quite a bit.
Excellent. Will you tell me a little bit about where you're located, where your vineyards are located, and that how that informs the styles of wine that you make?
Sure. We're located on the North Fork of Long Island, which is a very narrow peninsula that is part of the greater island. We are adjacent to the Long Island Sound to the northwest, and to the southeast, Peconic Bay, and to the east, directly the Atlantic Ocean. So we're a maritime climate. We're extremely influenced and buffered by the surrounding water, all of those bodies of water. And because we're on the East Coast, we get prevailing weather patterns that come from the west. So generally, the way we are aligned into the water, we get all of those weather patterns that are over the water first and then hit us. So it makes us cooler during these hot times during the summer, more of a breeze than you would get, say, inland. And we are much milder and protected from extreme winter cold in the winter because of the water. The water temperature, excuse me, goes to about the mid 30s at its very coldest. So if we've got an Arctic system in the winter that is in the single digits, let's say, those temperatures are going to be much higher than that once they hit our land on the North Fork. So it allows us this kind of confluence of events, along with the soils, which are glacially laid down. They're very porous. The topsoil is a nice, rich loam, and that lays on top of a bed of sand and gravel. So they're extremely well drained. Being in the Northeast, we do have 4 seasons, and we have humidity, and we have rainfall during the growing season. So that kind of soil also helps our conditions and drains very quickly and allows us to get right back into the field, and those vines dry off very quickly because of the breezes. So it's a tremendous, as I mentioned, a confluence of natural conditions that has allowed us to be here, growing only classic European varietals, which before the early 80s was really unheard of in the Northeast. And so that's where we've been able to make our mark. The style of wine is also completely different from what you'd find on the West Coast. They're much lower in alcohol. They have fresh, natural acidity that we have no need to adjust in any way. The sugar is all there. And the aromatics, because of our cooler ripening conditions, tend to be very bright and very forward. So stylistically, we're very unique for the continental U.S.
Excellent. Will you tell me a little bit about how the Long Island sustainable vineyard practices that you employ? Like, why are they important to you, and what do they do for your fruit?
They're really important to all of us here because we live here and we grow here, and we are over a sole source aquifer. So everything that we do above the ground is affecting what happens under the ground, and essentially is affecting our drinking water supply.
Hmm.
We do not have water piped in from another place. And so this aquifer on the North Fork is one of the last really remaining aquifers that is used that way on Long Island. Further west, as you get closer to New York City, obviously those aquifers are no longer in use. They have to go much further down to a third level aquifer. And then that water is used in water treatment and then sent to the villages and homes. Here, a lot of homes are still on wells. There is some county water coming in, but it's rare.
Hmm.
So everything that we do has to be watched very carefully. Not only that, but the drainage basin that surrounds us goes into the sound, it goes into the bay. There's a lot of creeks, a lot of natural systems that are in play, including shellfish, which are a big part of our economy, fisheries,
Hmm.
clams, mussels, oysters, in particular. Scallops have always been a huge fishing industry here, and all of that is affected by what we're doing. So that was really the impetus from where we began and looking at materials and techniques and practices that we do, and how can they be minimized, eliminated, or changed in order to protect the water supply, the aquifer, and for runoff purposes.
Right, that makes sense. Have you made any major changes to your vineyard practices in the past year, or have these been honed over a number of years?
I think most of these practices have been honed, and in fact, many people before we started this group in 2012 were already doing them. However, we have learned from working with some water quality investigative agencies in Suffolk County what materials they are finding in well testing programs that they run. And there are actually 20 plus wells that are being tested on vineyard sites specifically. There's also a number that are tested under row crop farms, conventional vegetable farms, sod farms, and things like that, nurseries. And we can see over the years, since this has been an agricultural area for really hundreds of years, it goes back into the mid 17th century. There are things in there that are very old that are still found in the water.
Hmm.
Excuse me, and also some relatively newer things within the last 50 years, let's say, that are there. Materials that are highly leachable, that can bind into water. Nitrogen is also probably the biggest issue, nitrogen runoff. And so we've also have a program in place for mitigating that as well. So these have all been kind of done. Part of sustainability is making people aware, and using common sense and recording, kind of like what we talk about now with contact tracing with COVID. We're trying to do similar kinds of metrics with materials that we use, practices that we use in the sustainability program to track and trace things that go on. Are they working? Are they important? Should they be changed? And so on. So yeah, it's a work in progress. We have gone from a high wire or trellising system back in the 80s to a vertical shoot position system today that most everybody uses.
Hmm.
Um, we used to try to dissuade birds through light and sound and mylar and all kinds of other propane cannons. And today we're using netting, which is really the best and safest and most sustainable way to control migrating birds, which can wreak havoc on vineyards during the fall.
Hmm. For sure. You spoke a little bit about the overall wine style of the North Fork. Would you mind discussing your personal winemaking style and what makes that different from other wineries in the area?
Well, I can really talk about mine specifically. I don't have a good handle on what other people may be thinking.
Sure.
But my style is essentially authentic terroir driven wine, where I'm trying to bring out the best and most obvious qualities in this region. I've always felt it's important with regards to wine. It's really all about where it's grown, what is the taste of that particular place. That's what makes wine interesting and dynamic and um, so delicious in many different ways. Um, and so I've tried to really hone in on that. 20 some odd years ago, there was some discussion about what is Long Island wine? How would you describe it? What are the main characteristics? And I think some people had a hard time coming to descriptors for that. I think it was often not thought of in
Mhm.
that way. Um, I think part of it had to do with, and I'm in this group myself, I think early days we tried to make things that were attractive to the consumer. Um, when I started in the early 80s, the biggest, most popular wine on the market was Kendall Jackson Chardonnay.
Mhm.
And it was a rich, buttery, sweet, syrupy, highly successful wine in the marketplace. And we gave that a shot. It didn't work out very well. We don't have the right levels of alcohol and viscosity in our wines. And I think it took time to kind of become our own person. We stopped trying to imitate our big brother and sister and actually tried to be our own people.
Right.
And I think that has to do with our region. And now we've embraced the levels of balance that we achieve. We no longer are trying to do anything different. And my approach to do that is to use completely indigenous yeast for fermentation in every single wine I make. I felt that was where things should start. Um, rather than looking at catalogs of different types of yeast that have been derived and extracted and isolated from different famous wine growing regions which are available. I wanted to see what our own yeast did and what our own
Mhm.
yeast can do. And I've been very pleased with the results.
Fantastic. And are there any specific qualities besides being authentic terroir driven wines that you hope for your wines to have in terms of ageability or fresh approachability, a more fruit forward style, anything that you tend to look for in general?
hmm I think I look at them different for whites and reds. Whites, we can typically look at levels of ripeness that would never really be accepted in other parts of the country, on the West Coast in particular. We're picking white grapes sometimes at 20 bricks, 21 bricks, sometimes at 18 and 19,
Hmm.
with high levels of character and maturity and aromatics. So those wines can come in at sometimes 10.5, 11.5% alcohol, which is something that's not easily achieved in warmer climates. Um, the acid levels are all completely intact because these grapes are ripening not in 95-degree heat in September, but typically sometimes as low as 50 degrees in the evenings in September. So we're retaining a lot of natural acidity. We never have to really adjust that uh, like many other places do. So there's a lot less intervention to make wines this way, which is what I have loved to do during my career. And I think many people have also come to a place where they're really comfortable with this style of wine, and consumers have been very receptive to it as well. These are going to be, in terms of whites, very bright, sometimes really crispy and zippy with acidity, really bright and forward fruit, tropical citrusy fruit. Um, and highly aromatic and without a lot of extraction. They're much more delicate and elegant. I'd say more, if we had to compare them to different wines around the world, we would be probably most similar to some of the examples out of France
Hmm.
that are being produced. However, we have, I think, a little more forward fruit. We're really a hybrid between the west coast of the United States and European styles of winemaking.
Right.
And that's kind of cool to actually see. Reds are pretty much the same, except we're dealing with a little higher level of ripeness.
Hmm.
We're pushing the envelope on our regional ability to ripen some of these. However, that ability seems to be growing with climate change. And so we have rich, lush, wonderfully mouth-filling red wines that have 12% alcohol or 12.5% alcohol, sometimes lower. So they're much more refreshing than many West Coast wines and a lot less intoxicating at the same time. And so it's a really unique niche to be in for those styles of wine. Personally, I don't find that a lot of new oak is needed in making these styles of reds. I rarely use oak in my white wines except for one of the Chardonnays that I do. And for reds, we're less than 5% new oak, if any, for many of the reds that I make, which is, again, really my style. I'm trying to let the fruit do the talking and not some barrel made in a different country.
Right.
So I'm trying to be true to the terroir again throughout the winemaking process.
Fantastic. And I have to ask, how have you all been dealing with the past few months, the shakeup that 2020 has given us? How are you coping, and has the business had to undergo any major changes?
Well, it is a challenge for sure. Our vineyard crew was probably the least affected because we're all outside.
Right.
In separate rows. The ability to distance is actually laid out in a vineyard on a grid.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be achieved. And we were a little nervous getting started with it, but everybody has been great. The crew understands. In fact, they probably wear masks most all of the day, even though they're not in close contact with their coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a pretty big success story for us. In terms of wine production, I had a small crew to begin with. It was only myself and my assistant and cellar masters, 3 of us. And so we took turns working solo at various parts of the day during the end of March throughout April. And luckily we had gotten a lot accomplished before March. We had a lot of early bottling. We were expediting lots of different wines into the bottle. Partly because we didn't have as big a crop the year before, so we ran out of a lot of things, and so we had a lot in storage going into COVID, so we didn't have to feel pressure working in a bottling situation.
Right.
But we've been working as safe as we possibly can, sanitizing. It's different, but the world is different. Everything is different. But I don't think the grapes really care. At this point, they will remain the same, and they continue on their growth and their journey throughout the growing season, and they'll be just fine. And we're full speed ahead. We have to be following our own state guidelines as well, in terms of the tasting room and distribution and things like that. But we've made it work, and we have a great group of customers who are very supportive, and we've done a great direct shipping business here. We can do that in New York, direct to consumer. And we're all in the same boat, and so we're all trying to make it work, and so far so good.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. I'm very sad that I'm not out on the North Fork. Usually I would be this time this year. So
Right.
Next year we'll have to just double up on our trips.
That's right.
Great. Well, I don't have any more questions for you. Anything else that you have to add before we sign off?
No, just wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and to learn about what we do. And I think that there's never been a better time for people to look at their local winery, no matter where they are, and see what is being produced locally, and try to understand that, just like the rest of the local food movement has changed how people think about where they're getting their food and their vegetables and fruit. The same is true for wine, and every state in the union now is making wine. And there are gems out there all over the country. And so I would encourage people to try what's out there, and I think they'll be pleasantly surprised.
Fantastic. Great point. Well, we're so happy to include you this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Courtney.
All right. Have a great rest of your week.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Bye.